U.S. intelligence agencies need to stop interfering in presidential elections. Hello, this is Robert Romano, Vice President of Public Policy with Americans for Limited Government, dailytorch.com. Hit that subscribe button. Today we're going to be talking about the Office of the Director of National Intelligence, which has issued an assessment on the 2020 election on foreign adversary preferences for president. This time they're saying China favors Joe Biden for president in 2020. And our question here at Americans for Limited Government is, what the heck are intelligence agencies issuing assessments on foreign adversary preferences for president? You have policies that change between administrations. Sometimes a candidate for office will disagree with current U.S. policy on foreign policy. And this could enter into the equation of not only how policies are going to shape or how institutions perceive candidates for president, but how the American people are going to perceive U.S. policy. And that's a legitimate debate. Again, policies change between administrations, and so it's up to Joe Biden and President Donald Trump to debate those issues. And the American people will, and not intelligence agencies, will be the ones who make a determination about which direction this country is going to go vis-a-vis domestic policy and also foreign policy. So let's take a look at this assessment. This was, again, from the Office of the Director of National Intelligence and the National Counterintelligence and Security Center. According to the assessment, quote, many foreign actors have a preference for who wins the election, which they express through a range of overt and private statements. Covert influence efforts are rarer. We are primarily concerned about the ongoing and potential activity by China, Russia, and Iran. Quote, we assess that China prefers that President Trump, whom Beijing sees as unpredictable, does not win re-election. China has been expanding its influence efforts ahead of November 2020 to shape the policy environment in the United States, pressure political figures it views as opposed to China's interests, and deflect and counter criticism of China. Although China will continue to weigh the risks and benefits of aggressive action, its public rhetoric over the past few months has grown increasingly critical of the current administration's COVID-19 response, closure of China's Houston consulate, and actions on other issues. For example, it has harshly criticized the administration's statements and actions on Hong Kong, TikTok, the legal status of the South China Sea, and China's efforts to dominate the 5G market. Beijing recognizes that all these efforts might affect the presidential race. And I think that's pretty thin evidence, if you ask me, that China's, pursuing its own interest and that they know that this could potentially impact the presidential race. Is that all they've got to say that they have a real preference on these issues? And wouldn't they be pursuing those issues regardless of who's president? Won't they be pursuing those issues next year if Joe Biden gets elected, for example? This all reeks to me like the January 2017 assessment by the Office of Director of National Intelligence assessing Russian activities and intentions in U.S. elections. In 2016 election, they were saying that Russia favored President Trump. Quote, we assessed Putin, his advisors, and the Russian government developed a clear preference for President-elect Trump over Secretary Clinton, and the influence campaign aspired to help President-elect Trump's chances of victory when possible by discrediting Secretary Clinton and publicly contrasting her unfavorably to the president-elect. Now, this 2017 assessment in January, it happened right before President Trump was sworn into office. They made it public, and they said Russia tried to get Trump elected. And this was to serve as a backdrop and to legitimize the FBI's ongoing counterintelligence and then criminal investigation into the Trump campaign and then the White House on false allegations that they were saying President Trump and his campaign were Russian agents who had helped Moscow hacked the Democratic National Committee and John Podesta emails and to put those onto WikiLeaks. So it really was a pretext. This ODNI assessment on Russia favoring Trump, it was a pretext to take down President Trump. It was outrageous. It should have never happened, should have never been published. Just like this new assessment saying that China prefers Joe Biden. I don't think that should have been published either. I think that this shows U.S. intelligence agencies getting involved in presidential politics, and they need to knock it off. It was not until 2 years after the January 2017 assessment that it would finally be debunked by none other than special counsel Robert Mueller. In his report, he's found that there was no interference by Russia that the Trump campaign was involved in. There were things that Russia had done, but they didn't have anything to do with the Trump campaign. And there were no members of the Trump campaign who were found to have conspired with Russia to hack the DNC or John Podesta emails and put them onto WikiLeaks. It was apparently fabricated by Christopher Steele, but according to the report, quote, the investigation did not establish that members of the Trump campaign conspired or coordinated with the Russian government in its election interference activities, end quote. The evidence does not establish that the president was involved in an underlying crime related to Russian election interference. Mueller, he would come to testify in 2019, July. He stated, quote, the investigation did not establish that members of the Trump campaign conspired with the Russian government in its election interference activities. We did not address collusion, which is not a legal term. Rather, we focused on whether the evidence was sufficient to charge any member of the campaign with taking part in a criminal conspiracy, and there was not. Now, after all was said and done, a 2018 poll by Axios found that the American people, particularly Republicans, were losing a lot of faith and confidence in the FBI as a result of the Mueller investigation and this persecution and prosecution of President Trump, this attempt to remove him from office based upon false allegations that he was some sort of Manchurian candidate. And it found that 47% of Republicans had an unfavorable view of the FBI, and only 38% of Republicans have faith in the Bureau. In other words, the investigation of Trump by intelligence and counterintelligence agencies undermined public attitudes towards the nation's national security apparatus. And after the revelations of Justice Department Inspector General Michael Horowitz in December of 2019, in his report, I just have to say, people's opinion are probably even lower right now. You had a FBI lawyer who altered documents in the Mueller investigation to basically keep the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act warrants against the Trump campaign and then the Trump administration to keep those going indefinitely, and by altering information to do with that. We only learned this from the Inspector General Michael Horowitz of the Justice Department, where OGC attorney sends SSA to an altered version of the liaison's June 15th email. And this was critical to the investigation continuing. It was an email that was going to say that Carter Page is a CIA operative and he's working on our side. He reports on the Russians. And instead, the person changed the email to say, not a source. For a Russian, getting information out of the Russians. Carter Page was a CIA asset, and they hid this from the FISA court, and they shouldn't have. The surveillance might have come to a conclusion much sooner if the FISA court had known that he was actually an American agent, not a Russian agent. But the FISA warrants that the Obama administration put into place, they were alleging that Page and the Trump campaign, they were Russian agents. Now, also, according to the Horowitz report, it detailed that the FBI hid other exculpatory evidence that would have cleared President Trump of any wrongdoing from the Justice Department and the FISA report. And the interview of Christopher Steele's primary subsource occurred on January 24, 2017, and he basically discredited everything Christopher Steele had put in his dossier, which was paid for by the DNC and the Clinton campaign, to falsely allege that Trump and his campaign had helped Russia hack the DNC and put the emails onto WikiLeaks. According to the subsource, he says he didn't even mention WikiLeaks. And so there was a lot of exaggerated statements in the Steele dossier, and the subsource said that he had instead, according to Horowitz, quote, the primary subsource made statements during his or her January 2017 FBI interview that were inconsistent with multiple sections of the Steele reports, including that some that were relied upon in the FISA applications. Among other things, regarding the allegations attributed to person one, the primary subsource's account of these communications, if true, was not consistent with and in fact contradicted the allegations made by Steele of a, quote, well-developed conspiracy between Trump and Russia. So I think loss of public confidence in intelligence and counterintelligence agencies that we see in the Axios poll, but more broadly, is a result of these intelligence agencies getting involved in presidential electoral politics and falsely alleging that President Trump was a Russian agent. They undermined the peaceful transfer of power from the Obama administration to the Trump administration, and now they're getting involved again. I say this is like the boy who cried wolf. It comes at a time when we're already, the American people, losing confidence in national security institutions. Presidential administrations now issuing more assessments about who foreign adversaries prefer for president. I think it does two things. It politicizes intelligence agencies, even more so than they already are, and it delegitimizes other intelligence gathering that's designed to actually avert real and present dangers to our national security. So if they're going to get involved in politics, people are going to start to disregard when they're issuing real threats about national security that, we could be attacked, or somebody has, weapons of mass destruction or something like that. It undermines public confidence in these institutions by getting political, and you're going to lose half of your audience when you do that. So intelligence agencies shouldn't be getting political. The Justice Department shouldn't be getting political. This is why. Given the history then of the DNI's prior assessment that it was a pretext for an expansive investigation of the Trump administration, where they carried over this top secret investigation from Obama administration to the Trump administration. They were spying on the president of the United States and didn't want to tell anyone about it. I'd say releasing a statement implying that China prefers Joe Biden raises similar questions. Namely, what's the evidence? Is China trying to infiltrate the Biden campaign? What are they doing to ensure President Trump's defeat in November? Are these false allegations coming from the ODNI as well? And the DNI doesn't really tell us. China has been expanding its influence efforts ahead of 2020 to shape the policy environment. It goes on to say things like they are pressuring political figures to views as opposed to China's interests, or it's, quote, deflecting and countering criticism of China, or, quote, it has harshly criticized the administration's statements and actions on Hong Kong. Wouldn't China do those things in a non-election year as well? And the evidence, quote, Beijing recognizes that all these efforts might affect the presidential race. That seems like pretty thin evidence to me. The idea that, they're going to pursue their interests and it happens to be an election year and they know that whatever they do might impact the presidential race. That's the preference. That's the interference. This is ridiculous. And I'll leave you with the close here. Of course, Beijing recognizes that its action can impact public attitudes, but so should the DNI. That is, the intelligence community should recognize that issuing an ill-advised statement that China wants President Trump to lose in November might similarly affect the presidential race, and stop interfering in presidential politics and elections. Enough is enough. That's the commentary. This is Robert Romano, Vice President of Public Policy with Americans for Limited Government, dailytorch.com. Hit that subscribe button, ring the bell for notifications, and have a good day.